I'm sorry, I'm a bit arrogant. We have a top manager.
Let me talk.
I think I'm a special one.
Time to go! Let me talk.
Everywhere you go, there's meat pies, and I'm surprised that Americans haven't embraced this, because this could be like the greatest thing on earth.
You are now listening to the Meat Pies podcast, your podcast for most things footy and few things pie. This is Gabe, and today I'm joined by two very, very special guests. We have KIRAN and Michelle from Right to Play from McGill University. McGill University? University of McGill. I should have clarified that before we hopped on.
You got it.
Okay, one of those. Incredible. They do incredible work with Right to Play, huge international charity. And we're just thrilled to have them on the Meat Pies podcast today. Thanks for joining. Thanks to all the people from the Right to Play chapter at McGill for watching the stream right now. This is the first ever. Thank you for being a part of the first ever live stream, Twitch stream in the history of the Meat Pies podcast. I appreciate that.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, this is so exciting.
Of course. Yeah, I know we connected a while back because honestly, the Meat Pies podcast is like, I think we're approaching the status of becoming the national podcast of Canada. After having Jesse Fleming on the podcast, after having Alistair Johnson on the podcast, maybe more just like the official podcast of Ontario, I think. But
big name.
yeah, I mean, Canadian legends. And honestly, like the more I think, I was thinking about this earlier, like in the car ride back to my house today, that a meat pie is really like, I feel like it's a very Canadian food, even though maybe it's not like a Canadian staple. I think just the elements and the qualities, especially maybe in a place like in like Montreal, in like Quebec, is more of a Canadian food, right? It's like meaty, it's warm, it's doughy, it's like kind of saucy and gravy-ish. So I really do think we have a shot at becoming the national podcast of Canada at some point. And you all are helping us continue that legacy.
We're so honored. We're so happy.
Well, I know you both played. We'll talk about Right to Play and all you two are doing, and the rest of the chapter is doing at McGill and in Montreal. But I guess sort of to kick it off, I wanted to hear a bit about like the sports cultures that you all grew up in. And I know you all both played a few different sports growing up, but what were sort of those cultures like? I know, KIRAN, you're from Vancouver, and Michelle, you're from Ontario, from Cambridge, I think I saw.
Yeah,
So can you just talk a little bit about those sports cultures that you grew up in, what sports you played, and maybe how those led you to become a part of Right to Play?
Yeah, for sure. So, like you said, I'm from Vancouver. I grew up playing soccer for a long time. I started probably when I was like 4. Had a really great experience. Was pretty competitive. Made a lot of my best friends from soccer. I think really the first time I learned about Right to Play was our jerseys used to say Right to Play on them. Like, I guess we were sponsored by them. And that's like the first time that I really learned about the charity. I went to high school, started playing volleyball, was pretty competitive in volleyball, and then I also sailed a lot. And I feel like those are all really different sports. Like soccer, is a huge sport, really widely loved. Volleyball is a really meticulous sport. There's a lot of like mental concentration in that. And then sailing is really just it's a really different sport. Like, it's not a physical sport. You have to use a lot of strategy. And yeah, I made a lot of my best friends. I learned a lot of leadership and communication skills. And it was kind of like what the culture of Vancouver was like. It was really focused on those 3 sports. And yeah, it's been nice to like kind of play in an intramural aspect at McGill. It's a lot more chill. You kind of just do it with your friends and have fun. But I had a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah, and so for me, like you said, I grew up in Cambridge, Ontario, Waterloo area, for those of you who don't know. My main sport growing up was figure skating, so I loved that. I did that for a lot of years. I don't even know how many, but it's super demanding. It's very competitive. There's a lot of pressure involved with it, and a lot of competition. It doesn't have that team dynamic. You get to train with a lot of the same people, especially once you reach a certain level. You're all kind of in the same training division. You do a lot of the same hours. but really demanding hours, a lot of early mornings, before school, after school, leaving school early. And so I loved it, but there's a lot of I'd say the culture is not the most positive. It had some great aspects. My club was really great, but in terms of actual competing, there's a lot of I would say, especially for female athletes, a lot of body image pressure. There's a lot of psychological pressure that comes into that sport, just because of the artistics and the aesthetics of it. So I did stop that relatively early. Once you hit about grade 9 or 10, most people kind of decide, okay, you're going to go through with it and try to take it to the next level or just kind of fizzle out. So I decided to focus on high school sports instead. So I started playing field hockey, which again was really nice to do a team sport. I did defense and midfield, and played that for all 4 years, which I loved, and then started playing it outside of school as well. And then I was also really involved with our cross country and track and field teams. So more distance running, and then a little bit of hurdles and steeplechase in there, which was always a fun little challenge. I would say, the culture of high school sports, I think, was really refreshing for me, coming from a really, competitive background, and having, your friends around you, and you were working towards something together. Even with track and field, you're competing as a high school, and you go in with kind of a collective goal to cheer each other on instead of always having that weird competitive edge that I found was always present in skating. So I think having the combination of those two gave me some really useful insights for how to push yourself personally and beat your own, personal goals and records, but then also how to work within a team and to develop goals together, but then also, better yourself through that team dynamic and learn from other players. So haven't done a ton at McGill, but done a couple fun intramural sports, and then a little bit of skating here and there. So it's been good.
Yeah, all the guys in the podcast are university intramural legends. We like to think, even though I think if anyone had actually seen us play while we were in college, people would probably say otherwise. But we really enjoyed our intramural sports during university, and it sounds like for the most part you all had pretty positive sports experiences growing up. Obviously, Right to Play talks a lot about the different barriers that there are to different sports. But I guess I was sort of wondering if there are any experiences in particular from, your high school days of playing sports or growing up playing sports that were maybe, I don't know, a reason that you wanted to join Right to Play, or if there was one reason in particular that you joined Right to Play when you got to McGill.
I can start. So I guess the biggest thing for me was the idea that sports is really exclusive, typically, even from a young age. Sports are really expensive, especially, growing up in figure skating. There's a lot involved with, skates themselves are a couple $100, and then you have traveling around, all that stuff really adds up quickly. And so I think growing up in that culture, I was really aware from a young age of the fact that everyone I was training with was basically of a certain socioeconomic bracket or income bracket, and that was automatically, it kind of restricts your perspective on life and who you're surrounding yourself with. And outside of school, I was definitely with a different group than I was being exposed to within school. And so I think I was pretty aware from a young age that there were a lot of kids that I was going to school with that didn't have the same opportunities as I did. And my parents, worked really hard for that to be an option for my sister and I. But I do think that's something that's kind of stuck with me even into high school sports. I went to a really economically diverse high school, and even some of the fees for high school sports, it wasn't accessible to everybody, and that's something that frustrated me. And I think a lot of students, lost the motivation to try and get involved in stuff because they already knew that they wouldn't be able to afford it or really go anywhere with it. So I think coming to McGill, I'm also, a political science student and studying a lot of issues about economic inequalities, and then also the global dynamic of Right to Play, how they're working with not only around the world in different, impoverished or war-torn or disaster-torn countries, but also in Northern Canada with various Indigenous groups. It's something I'm, really passionate about. And I think this charity and this organization really bridges, my local experience growing up and also some of the issues that I want to tackle moving on into my career. So I don't even know. I think I became aware of it through you because you had the soccer jersey familiarity. So at our activities night in first year, I kind of I think it was a combination of what I knew I wanted to do, but mostly just that moment of realizing wow, I am really privileged to be able to do sports, and that's something that I really am passionate about other kids having the chance to engage in, because I think it does foster a lot of really, really important life skills, which I'm sure we'll get into in a little bit. But that's kind of my awakening moment, I would say.
Yeah, I think I had a
Awesome.
similar experience. When I was in high school, I was really passionate about opening opportunities for women in sport. And I was really fascinated by like the US women's soccer team, and the differences between like the Canadian women's soccer team and the Canadian men's team and the US team. And so I wrote like a lot of like research papers. Like I did my AP capstone project on um, like opening opportunities for women in sports. And so when I got to university, another thing was I was always like, you hear a lot about charities that try and empower people by like some of the basic necessities. Like, you know, a lot of people obviously don't have access to food or healthcare, and so there's a lot of really great charities that help people with those basic like life skills and necessities. But I liked how Right to Play really like humanized a lot of people by like basically saying that, you know, these things are really important, but it's also really important that you just learn how to play, and like you also just get the opportunity to do things that, you know, are really easy for a lot of people in other countries. Because I think when people think of charities, they think of like giving people food and giving people healthcare, giving people like shelter. And I liked how this really like normalized and humanized people. And I was also just obviously passionate about sports, and so I thought it'd be a really cool opportunity. And I also like really thought that I was going to work with the IOC or like work in a nonprofit for women in sports, so it would be a good entryway into one of those kinds of careers. So and I just really aligned with the mission, and I think I still do. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I hope so. You two are the chapter presidents. No, but I think, well, first of all, it's really relevant right now. Obviously, the conversation around having, you know, equitable pay for the men's and women's games. Obviously, in the U.S., we've had a sort of battle that's been taken to court and been fought out for a while now, and then Canada's kind of going through the same thing at the moment. And hopefully, it's a topic, honestly, that isn't so relevant in a few years from now, because I think, you know, the proper progress is hopefully going to get made. But it's interesting that that's sort of how you got your first peek into sort of this type of work. And Michelle, also, it's interesting, before like this interview, I was kind of remembering like this old quote. I had to look it up in my head, but when Zlatan Ibrahimovic was playing in the US, there's a very famous quote from when he was in the MLS, and he wanted to put his kids into soccer in the States, and basically said that like the sport is too expensive. It's you know, if my children want to play for a decent team, I have to pay, you know, $3,500 per kid for them to play. And it wasn't so much about like the number or like, you know, obviously he's a celebrity, he can afford that, but it was more about, you know, he was exposing that you don't need necessarily like the fanciest equipment or, you know, the money to run a decent team or to have a positive experience in sports. And a lot of times people use those price tags, you know, as barriers to keep a lot of people that otherwise would be incredible players or just would enjoy the game just as much from doing so. And I think he ended that quote talking about like Pele kind of growing up playing with without so many resources and, you know, becoming the greatest player of all time regardless. So it's interesting, you know, you talking about those barriers that exist in figure skating, you know, exist the same in a lot of other sports. I know Right to Play is focused internationally mostly, but you also touched on the focus in Canada as well. And I know that you all do these play days where you're going into different schools around Montreal. Can you guys talk a bit more about those play days and just sort of what you're doing there, what the goal of them is, and maybe how often you have them, like what you get from those experiences too?
Yeah, for sure. So we actually had one today. We just came back
Nice.
from one. So basically, the idea is we connect with these local schools, and we try and focus on underprivileged schools, so schools that maybe don't have access to the same resources. And we'll go in. I think so far this is our third one of the year. And we basically go in and teach a gym class. And we have a lot of different games. We teach kids from today. I taught kindergartners. You taught like grade 3, grade
Yeah, a little bit
5s.
older.
Yeah, and so basically we play different games with them, and within the games there's supposed to be different lessons that they can learn. So you can learn about like leadership, communication. One of the games we have them kind of pretend to be doctors and mosquitoes, and we're teaching them about malaria. So basically like trying to form partnerships and relationships with underprivileged schools, but also trying to like help these kids learn about how their experience is different from a lot of kids who are just like them on the other side of the world, and why they should, feel really privileged to have that experience and also want to give back and help.
I think it's a really unique opportunity too, because at those ages, excuse me, in elementary school, and also just you have a really diverse group of kids that we're working with. And so it's the one opportunity, I think, where there isn't that divide I was just touching on. Like, you're in a school setting, you're all in the same class, you're doing the same curriculum. And so your engagement with your peers is, it's just a peer-to-peer game. You see each other as fellow teammates and team players. And there's not kind of this hierarchical division that I think establishes really quickly once you get into extracurricular sports outside of school. And so I think we just see it as a really good opportunity, to extend our mission to the Montreal community, and kind of, build those local connections with our community, but also as a chance to show kids that like you have these opportunities. They're all around you. They don't have to, like you said, cost a lot of money. Of course, that is something we do also try to tackle are the financial barriers and the resource barriers. But, if we can do these opportunities and run these programs in a space where everyone has access to these programs, I think that we see that as really beneficial. The second thing I'd say is maybe it's the third thing now, but is allowing university students and university athletes who are interested in, sharing their passion for sport with kids. You get really siloed, I think, in the university setting of being around people your own age who are also always stressed all the time. It's a really good opportunity for students just to be in the community, be with some kids, and share their passion for something that you get out of touch with, I think, really easily in academia.
Totally. I think like even, now that I'm out of university and still, just as a young adult, I realize, that I don't spend a lot of time with people outside of my sort of age bracket.
Mm-hmm.
And you realize that, obviously you learn a lot from people older than you, but I also learn so much from spending time with people younger than me, whether like you have family members that are younger than you, or, I've worked in schools before, like I've been a camp counselor before, and I always forget like how much you can learn from working with people that are younger than you too. Yeah, that's really fantastic. And I guess, talk a bit more about the organization, or at least, your involvement with the chapter. Is there like a story or maybe a connection with the community from elsewhere during your time at Right to Play that's really stuck with either of you since you've been a part of it?
That's a good question. It was a little bit hard because the first couple of years we were really restricted with our community connections because of COVID. But one thing I would say, and this wasn't a personal experience, but it is, Right to Play experience. We did a panel in our second year where we organized a bunch of Right to Play workers who are working in parts of Canada. And one of the representatives, she was working with an Indigenous community in Nunavut, and she was talking about how there was, the opportunity for them to teach lacrosse to students at a camp they were running that weren't themselves Indigenous and had actually never played the sport before. And actually had no idea the fact that it's such a huge sport in Canada. There's so much hype around it, and it's just so under the rug. I think when we're in, big urban cities like this, like we have lacrosse teams at McGill, but I don't know, I'd never been really exposed to it until I came here. And so, and then being able to, have that part of culture and heritage being shared with people outside of that who weren't familiar with the sport before. That was just a really powerful thing. And it does go to show also with an organization like this that's working across so many different contexts, the adaptability of the things that we're doing, and being able to, help kids who maybe don't see their potential or who haven't really been invested in any of the sports that are being taught in gym classes. In our plays, we focus on a lot of low organizational games that are really accessible to kids. And so even today we had one kid who was crying during the curriculum because he got frustrated with the game, and at the end he actually came back with one of the assistant teachers to come give us all a high five because he was like, I had so much fun, and I realized that, you know, it didn't actually matter that I was getting frustrated. In the end, I had a great time. So just really seeing how we can, you know, foster to the communities that we're working with, whether that be in settings that we're not personally involved with, but we hear stories from, or right here locally with some of the games that we have to adapt on the spot. I just think the curriculum that Right to Play establishes is really flexible that way, and that's something that's really, it stuck with me, and realized that, you know, sport is accessible and it can be used in a lot of different settings, even when you do have restrictions on what resources you have.
Yeah. I think it's hard to choose one memory. We've been with the club this is our 4th year. And I think my favorite memories are probably the play days, just because, like you said, you literally see kids like look up to you, and you don't really think you have that power. But they like start to form really strong relationships with you. And they're really sad to see you go at the end of that gym class. And it's like you don't really realize you can make a small difference in people's lives. But I think those experiences really taught me that we do. Because sometimes you just think about, like, we're college kids, like at McGill, we're just like in this club, and how much of an impact do we really have? But those are kinds of the experiences where you realize, like, these kids are going to think about this, and they're probably going to like use that experience and think about Right to Play in the future, especially when they're playing sports and when they're thinking about like how they can give back. We also had a Right to Play Olympics, which was in February, which is basically like this huge multi-sport tournament, and we actually got a really big turnout. A lot of people came, and it's so cool to see so many different people across McGill come together, and like bond, and you saw people like form new friendships. And it's cool because, you know, you're raising money, you're raising awareness, but you're also like building a lot of bonds. And I think that's probably like one of our favorite things that we've been able to do this year is we built a really strong exec team, which honestly like kind of feels like a family. Because I think in the past, like, it's been a little bit difficult, especially with COVID, like you're meeting online, you're not really seeing people face to face. But I think this year, a lot of the people who used to be on our exec graduated, so we kind of started brand new, and there's a lot of new faces. But just like seeing the camaraderie develop between everyone, and like seeing people be so passionate about all of their positions was really inspiring for both of us. So there's a lot of really good memories, is what I'm trying to say. But
yeah, of course. And I think, you know, I was talking to my mom about this the other day, actually, because she works for a nonprofit. And I think like technology and COVID, like lots of other things, have made philanthropy really impersonal in a lot of ways. And you know, being involved in something, it sounds like Right to Play, you know, it is a way that makes philanthropy kind of what it's supposed to be in a lot of ways again, and making it much more personal. And part of that is team building, and part of that is being out in the community, and doing it in person. Obviously, writing a check can be just as impactful sometimes, but it's important to have both. And it sounds like you all have found a pretty good balance at McGill as well. I was looking at some of like the fundraisers you all have had, and some of the money you guys have brought in, and is really impressive too. And you know, all that's important: community building and being there and showing up, but also, you know, like also getting some of the financial business done too. I'm sure the people at the big Right to Play offices really like that. But
So,
I guess
because everyone has limited budgets, but we've been really great. People have been willing to, you know, give a couple bucks to participate in events. It's really nice.
Yeah. And is there like an opportunity for students like in other places to start their own Right to Play chapters at, you know, like their high schools or the universities?
Yeah, so there's a couple across different campuses. I think there's one at Western. I think there's one at UBC too. But you basically like reach out to the organization, and it's really easy to build a chapter. Yeah, I mean, anyone really at a high school, at a university, just needs to contact the organization and they can implement it.
And one thing that we're really grateful with working with the organization is they're pretty hands off in terms of letting you figure out what works for your community. Of course, they always send out emails when they're doing any international events. For example, they'll do like a international development week every year, usually in March, I believe, where they focus on like one theme. It's been like access to girls sports and education before, other themes like that where they really target in on one issue. And so of course there's still like that group cohesion that you establish internationally or across Canada with different university campuses, but they're really flexible in terms of what we're able to do for fundraising, where we're allocating those funds, whether it's like here in the community or to their actual organization. So it works for us, and it allows us to do different events and activities, like you were saying, that appeal to different branches of our campus and our community groups. So yeah, it's been a really, really easy and really useful process, I think, for us.
Yeah, and it's super pertinent thinking about, women's access and girls' access to sports right now, with it being a pretty big year for women's sports. Women's World Cup is coming up in just a few months. I think hopefully it'll be the biggest Women's World Cup yet. And I know all the guys on the podcast are super excited to watch. And honestly, there's been a lot of buzz just being in the US. But I'm sure it's probably the same in Canada with the result in the Olympics a few years ago. I'm assuming both of your picks to win the Women's World Cup is Canada.
100%.
Of course.
Yeah. Do you feel like in the past few years there's been a lot more conversation around just, obviously the men's team too, they've had a lot of kind of newfound success, but especially the women's team, do you remember there being so much buzz when you were growing up, or do you feel like there's always been kind of that constant support for the women's team in Canada?
That's a good question, actually. Especially with like the newfound success of the men's team. I think growing up, like the women's team was really popular back in Vancouver. Just because like Christine St. Clair's from Burnaby, which is really close to Vancouver.
Gotcha.
And I even like growing up playing soccer, I know that a lot of the work of my club was like partnered with the Canadian women's team, and we would go to like some of their games, and we would go to Whitecaps games, and like we would get to stay behind to get like signatures, and that was really focused exclusively on the women's team. Yeah, and then I think like obviously we won gold at the Olympics. I remember like staying up till 4 a.m. because of the time difference.
Yeah.
Like the most magical moment, doing it with like all of your friends who you've like watched these people play soccer with for so long. And I know that they did this tour when they won. And I'm pretty sure the first stop was Montreal. It was in October. And so me and one of my roommates, Ava, went. And a lot of our friends also went to the game. And they were playing, I think, New Zealand. No, not New Zealand, maybe Australia, some team. And they won. And it was really a celebration of like the fact that they won gold. And like Montreal was so hyped for them. They went to Toronto, they went to Vancouver. And yeah, it was like a really collective magical moment, I think. I don't know if I can speak to how much the women's access to sport has changed just because I'm no longer really playing competitive soccer. Obviously like we're getting a league now, which is wild. But there also has been a lot of hype with the men's team too. We have five roommates. Our other roommate went to high school with Alfonso Davies and Jordan Harden and Julia Grosso. So
let's say maybe we'll exchange contact information after the podcast.
Yeah, she's downstairs. We should have added her to the podcast. But maybe. Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of hype with the men's team too, which has also been, because I remember like watching them in the World Cup. All of our friends would come together at like our local like school bars to watch the Canadian men's team play, and that I've never seen so much hype around the Canadian men's team, and that was a really cool thing to see too. So yeah, I mean it is so nice to be able to, like, we have so many other really strong like professional hockey teams, but to be able to do it in soccer, it's just like a really, really nice feeling.
And I'd say too, like as someone who's not a huge soccer fan, unless it comes around like the World Cup and stuff like that, I would say like I definitely have become more engaged and more aware of the women's team. Like even a name like St. Clair, I'm like, oh, I know that. Like I think that speaks to the fact that they have become a lot more prominent. There is a lot more even media coverage, I think, on women's sport. Obviously, it's nowhere near what it could be or should be, and there's a lot of work to do on that. But I think compared to I mean, that's just me being around more soccer fans too. But I would say even in high school, I had a lot of my friends were soccer fans, and I didn't hear a lot about any of the teams. So I think this is really refreshing. Living in a house, of 5 girls, not all of them are soccer fans, but there's just a lot of excitement, I would say, in general around sports for women and men. I would say in the Montreal and the McGill community. But even at McGill, like you see, for example, we have a lot of friends who are on competitive sports teams, and a lot of our friends do still see discrepancies between even the resources and the different like field times and practice times, even like change room qualities around campus. So I think there's a lot of work to be done. I think at the local level before you even necessarily see those changes, because if athletes can't train in facilities or in conditions that are workable for them, you're not going to see the same level of success. So I think that's maybe a good spot to start, is really for pushing for those changes at more of a local or university level, so that we can see, more energy, more enthusiasm towards those athletes as they do get into some of the professional leagues.
Totally. Those are really great points. Before we wrap up here, I just wanted to mention, I kind of alluded to it before we started, but I know you all have a big event coming up in like a week, maybe like 9 or 10 days. It's a big beer pong tournament. We might not we might not make it onto the Right to Play international airwaves now, honestly, but I don't care. Beer pong is more important than making it onto their website. That being said, I think the work of Right to Play is more important than beer pong, most likely. But I just wanted to say, like, have you all had this event before, and what is sort of the outcome of the event? What does a successful beer pong tournament look like for Right to Play McGill?
That's an excellent question. We've done similar events in the past. We've done a lot of like bar crawls. We've done some versions of like drinking game beer tournaments. This is kind of our first like full-fledged beer tournament.
I just want to say, for all people in the United States, the drinking age in Canada is lower than it is in the United States. So everything they're doing is very legal, because we actually, when we were in college, we would do a lot of, I'm sure since Kiran, you're from Vancouver, you maybe have heard of this, but like people from Seattle would do a lot of their university things in Vancouver, so that everyone could go out and have a good time and drink legally in the country of Canada. I know people from like the Midwest do the same thing with Toronto. So yeah, I just wanted to say we're not promoting illegal activities, but sorry. Go ahead, continue with telling me about your events.
Quebec is actually 18. It's even lower, because I know Vancouver's 19, Toronto's 19, but Quebec is 18, and
that's the French influence. That's the French influence.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's kind of we don't really have a clear measure of success, but I think for us, it being the last big event of the year, we want to get as many probably younger students involved as possible, so that we can help build the club moving forwards. A lot of our executive team and people who are, really present and engaged with our events are graduating or are nearing graduation. So in order to keep the club going and to kind of keep the momentum that we've built both as a campus chapter and also within the Montreal community, to keep that going, we really want to get some younger students involved, get them familiar with the organization, some of our goals, so that they can carry on what we've built after we graduate. That'd be really nice to see. So yeah, getting them excited about an event like this and making it really central and accessible to people, even if people don't want to drink, just come out, support the activity, support the club. Kieran, you can talk about maybe the fundraising component.
Yeah, I think like going to a university, there's this balance between, like, you need to think about an event that's going to raise a lot of money, or you need to think of an event that's going to raise a lot of awareness. And typically the events that we have, like the Olympic tournament, which was a multi-sport tournament, people want to play sports, but they don't necessarily want to pay to play sports. But with the idea of like cheap beer and maybe some prizes, we have a really great sponsorship team, which goes around into little like local restaurants, and even like spin classes and like Amazon Alexas. They find a lot of prizes that people can win. And people at McGill go really hard for beer pong. So we actually used to be undefeated back in the day in our first year. Not to flex, but to flex.
I can believe it.
It's just a good opportunity to raise a lot of awareness, and to raise a lot of money. Sometimes our drinking events do like the most success financially. So a lot of people are really competitive at McGill, so they're willing to like put forth some money to win some cool prizes, but also to play some cool games. We've had a lot of beer pong tournaments in the past. It used to be kind of a staple of Right to Play at McGill, and it's pretty easy to do, especially with like partnering with different bars and with different events on campus, which are pretty familiar to beer pong tournaments. So it's just like some good camaraderie and like a good opportunity to raise some money. And we're looking forward to it. It's on March 31st.
And this one is especially important to us because we're looking to raise money for a school that we're actually working with locally. So it's a school that doesn't have a lot of funds. A lot of the kids who go to that school come from difficult home situations. So we've partnered with one of the teachers there. The goal is to raise for them to get some sporting equipment that they're lacking in their gym facilities. And so it's a really local cause for us. That's why we're really invested in it. And also hoping to, access a community that's really socioeconomically diverse, racially diverse, to get, again, more kids involved in sport and to kind of change this notion that you have to be of a certain identity to really engage with sport and be really active in sports. So yeah, we're excited and hoping that can be something we do every year, some sort of like equipment drive or fundraising event for not the international charity, but for the local component of our charity and how the students that we actually engage with on a personal basis.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, doing good, having a good time. This is what we like to hear, like to see. I will be remiss if I don't mention like the other guys on the podcast. A couple of them might be kind of mad at me, but there is a game that is very famous amongst the guys on the podcast called Flong, and it's very similar to beer pong. And I don't know if this is necessarily the correct platform for me to like describe all the rules. Just not because any of them are inappropriate, just because I don't have, I don't think they'll make for the greatest and most interesting podcast content in the world. But either way, you might have to just look up Flong. It's like beer pong, like, you got teams of two, but the setup is a little different. Some of the ones you find online are not, it's bootleg Flong. It's not the right Flong.
Okay.
But just if you want to, mix it up, if like the 50th game of beer pong is getting a little tired,
Absolutely. I like it.
Anyways,
We'll have to look it up.
It's a life altering game, for worse sometimes than for better. But yeah, that's kind of all I have to say on that. I mean, it was really fantastic to meet you all. It sounds like you guys are doing incredible work, with Right to Play, and it's an amazing organization now for hopefully our listeners to check out if they're interested in getting involved in a chapter or want to make a donation. Can people make a donation like directly to the McGill chapter?
Yeah, we have a link. We can send it to you. Yeah,
for sure. And is it on like your socials and everything too?
I don't think it currently is, but that's a great idea that we did not think of before, and we will definitely be doing that after the podcast.
Otherwise, there is a way to donate directly on the Right to Play website, the international website. But if you're looking, to really get the local component, we can set that up. Absolutely.
Sure.
Yeah.
Nice. And I'm sure people can find you on social media as well. Do you want to? I forgot what the handle was. I should have had it here. The Right to Play handle. I don't even know. I think if you look up like Right to Play McGill, it'll probably come up on Instagram.
Yeah. It's RTP McGill. There we go.
Nice. Anything else you all like want to promote? Anything you want to share? Anything you got? No pressure.
We're just really thank you so much for having us.
Yeah.
This is awesome.
Thanks for coming on. I'm super excited that you all got to come on.